Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to my December wrap-up. This is going to be a fairly modest wrap-up because my reading kind of tanked at the end of the year, but I do have a few to talk about. I've got a few that I finished, I've got a graphic novel, some audiobooks, and stuff that I DNF'd as well, so let's dive into it. Actually, before I dive into it, I do have Vlogmas for 2020 on my channel, so that chronicles the last chunk of this month, I guess, as to what I was reading and what I was DNFing and stuff. So if you want more of my thoughts, I'll leave that playlist linked down below, but now let's get into it. First of all, I listened to an audiobook in the Dresden Trial series, so this is book 10, White Knight. It is an audiobook narrated by James Masters. If you have been here a while, you know that I'm loving this series. If you haven't, surprise, urban fantasy, wizard detective, loving this so far. And I can't really talk about this synopsis without giving you major spoilers for the previous books, so I'm going to be as vague as possible to give you an idea but not give you like the meat of what the past books entailed. So this one has Dresden in it where he is investigating some suicides that don't seem like suicides, and there's also some magic users in play, there's also some powerful vampires, and the suicides are the main kind of crime, and the perpetrator of these crimes is set up to be somebody that is close to Dresden. So there's a few moving parts in here, as usual with the Dresden book. I really loved the delving into the White Council in this book, especially delving into Harry's power, and while I felt that some storylines wrapped up fairly quickly, I expected them to not drag on but to develop over a few more books. I was a little bit shell-shocked that they wrapped up so fast, considering that they've had a few books build up to this point, and it just didn't seem like they were finished, but I did enjoy where they ended up regardless. Obviously, I loved Harry's character development, I loved the other characters around him as well. I think I'm about to sneeze. Of course, it disappeared. Anyway, like I said, I'm loving the characters in here. The plot was always surprising to me. Didn't see stuff coming. I love how this resolved. I loved the new threads that kind of started to open up, and I love the new nasties that we get to see more of as well. Just like the ghouls. I love the ghouls. They're so terrifying. So this was a 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. Not my favorite in the series so far, but this series generally clocks a 4 or more rating from me. So I'm pretty happy that I've kept on with this series, and I've read 10 books in it so far this year. So no doubt in 2021 I'm going to continue because I already plan to do that. And then eventually I want to reread them as well. So this is a book series that I'm really thoroughly enjoying. Next is a contemporary book that I've had on my to be read pile for many years, and it is Lily and the Octopus. This is a book that I bought literally because it had a dash hound on the front cover, and I was like, I'm gonna love this because I love dash hounds. The logic, not exactly flawless, and I'm unfortunately going to DNF this. I DNF'd it at 23 pages or 26. Either way, I didn't get to page 30. The way that this is set up is there's a guy who, he's kind of having a rough and tumble life. He needs to get his life together, basically. He's got anxiety, but he views his therapist in a very negative light. He seems like a rather complaining kind of character and a woe is me kind of person. And while I can take some of that, if it makes up the entire character, I'm not really interested, and that's why I DNF'd it, just because his voice seemed rather naive and very frustrating for somebody who is an adult man. Unfortunately, I just didn't like this, and I think if I had persevered and pushed through, because I listened to the audiobook and that wasn't really great either, if I'd persevered I probably would have loved the themes in here, but I just didn't like the angle it was told from and the writing style of that angle, if that makes any sense. I talked about it in a vlog, so you can see me kind of get disappointed in a vlog, I guess. But yeah, I wouldn't have rated this. I've DNF'd it. So unfortunately, it's just not one that I enjoyed or wanted to continue reading. I do love a book in a similar style called The Art of Racing in the Rain, and that is about a dog named Enzo, and it's told from Enzo's perspective, so it makes sense to delve into his thoughts. This one is told from the main guy's perspective, but it delves into his internal dialogue and his conversations with Lily, and he envisions her answering him, and so he gives her own voice, and it just seemed kind of corny and not right. It just felt stilted. So another reason that I DNF'd it. Anyway, I DNF'd this. It's not on my radar anymore, and it's one that I can just move past. So thankfully it's not on my TBR anymore, but I tried. And then next is a pretty big pivot because I read one of my most anticipated releases for the early months of 2021, and that is The Mask Falling by Samantha Shannon. This is the 4th book in her Bone Season series. It is an urban fantasy, so I kind of went on a bit of an urban fantasy kick again this month, what with Dresden and this book, but this follows Paige. She, in the first book, is taken to like an internment camp kind of thing. There is a puppet government controlling Scion London, which is where Paige lives. There's been a takeover of Ireland by Scion on London. And so there's a whole bunch of government politics going on. There's a whole bunch of magic going on, and clairvoyants like Paige, they are actually illegal. And so if they're found out, they're taken away. And that's why Paige got taken to this camp. Anyway, that is basically the plot or the beginning of book 1. And from that point onwards, I can't say anything, obviously, because of spoilers. But this one, like those previous books, had a lot of world building in it. It had a lot of character that I like. It had quiet moments that built up the characters. And then it also had action that paid that off as well. And there was a whole section at the very end where I was like, what is going on? And I looked at early reviews and everyone kind of had this whiplash moment. And I was like, that's just surely people hyping up the book because they love the series. I'm not feeling that, holy crap, oh my god. So it really hit me in the face and I didn't expect it to. And I really wanted to give it a 5 stars, but because the beginning was slower to me and it felt like, not a slog, but it took me effort to get through. So when I'd put it down, I would only be interested in picking it back up if I was reading it again. It would always take me motivation to go back to, if that makes sense. But after a certain point, which was like 2/3 in, I was actively thinking about it when I wasn't reading it anymore. And that's when I was like, this book has hooked me. So 4.5 stars. Unfortunately, I couldn't give it 5, but I really wanted to. But now I want to go back and read all of the books before this one. This is the 4th book in like a 7-book series, so it is by no means finished, but it's a series that people hype up a lot, and there was a lot of talk about it a while ago, and so I think a lot of people own this, if I'm having a guess, but probably haven't read it, so this is your sign. Read The Bone Season and then read this when it comes out in January, because I want people to talk about it with me. Oh yes, and I also want to thank Bloomsbury Australia because they kindly sent me this review copy. This is a proof, and so the final copy doesn't come out until the 29th of January, I believe. And then you can probably sense a theme here because the next book on here is also a DNF. This is me going through my books that I have left on my TBR pile, and these are books that I've owned for a while. I've said this in a few other videos, so sorry if I sound like a broken record, but I wanted to get my TBR pile way down, and I had like a handful left, and so this is like my 3rd last book, and it's A Skinful of Shadows by Frances Hardinge. This is an urban fantasy, and I thought it was a fantasy. It is a young adult book, and it's from a character's perspective called Makepeace. She has a very rocky, abusive relationship with her mother, and at the beginning of the book, they're starting to talk about world building things. The language is very fairy tale, so if you like that, you might like this, but I DNF'd it after like 26 pages, just because the dialogue felt very formal. I liked initially the prose writing style, so the paragraphs in between the actual dialogue, but it got to a point where I just couldn't connect with it. I didn't care about certain things that were happening in the book, even though they were supposed to be, you know, pinnacles of emotional payoff almost, or setup at least, and I just didn't get invested. I didn't feel hooked. And so I just thought this writing style is really not doing it for me. So that's why I DNF'd it. So hopefully someone else will like it. Probably someone is going to be drawn to it by the shiny cover because let's be honest, I was. So hopefully someone else likes this. But again, I unfortunately DNF'd it. But at least again, like Lily and the Octopus, it's off my TBR pile now. And then as for the graphic novel, I read Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan. This is about a bunch of girls who are paper delivery girls in the 1980s. They discover a time machine kind of by accident, and they get sucked into it, and then they experience multiple timelines and a lot of chaos. I like these characters, but I liked the first volume more than the 2nd and 3rd so far, and I gave this a 3.5 stars. I believe this is quite a short series. I think there's only 6 volumes in it in total, or maybe 7, maybe 8. Either way, it's less than 10. I'm now second guessing myself, but I know it's fairly few. So I wanted to read this, and I got this on sale because it was like $10, and usually in Australia I'd pay like $25 or more for a graphic novel, so it was fairly cheap by Australian standards, and I picked it up for that reason because I knew I wanted to continue the series. I'm a bit more lukewarm on it now just because the characters in this volume in particular didn't have a storyline that I was interested in particularly, and the way that they're drawn, all of the girls start looking fairly similar, so I think I have to read from the beginning again in order to differentiate them, because maybe they were split up in the past and that's why I'm getting confused, but the multiple timelines is clearly too much for my end of year brain. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I like the colors, I like the illustrations, I just think I need to get reacquainted with this series maybe, or I need to read the next volume and decide whether to DNF or continue. So I'm kind of at a grey area with this series so far, but by all means it is enjoyable, and that's why I've continued reading it so far. And now I'm currently reading 2 things, so I want to mention them, but they probably won't appear until a January January wrap up. Even if I DNF them, I will still mention them. So Modoc is the first one. This is a memoir of a circus elephant. It's about a boy and a baby elephant who are born on the same day within an hour of each other, and the boy's father is an elephant trainer, so there is a natural connection there. Obviously the boy becomes an elephant trainer, and it follows their journey as the circus is not necessarily under the same handlers that the boy grew up with. So it follows that kind of adventure, and I've been told that it's sad, so I'm reluctant to continue reading it just because I know it'll probably make me cry, because anytime there is an empathetic animal involved, I'm always emotional. So I'm, I think, a third through this so far, and while the audiobook hasn't really, you know, gotten its teeth into me and hooked me, I'm reading this because my grandparents really enjoyed it and they've written in the front of it to me. And I've had this for like 7 years, and it's just sat on my shelf after going on holiday with me, and I started reading it then and just never continued. So this is really me pushing myself to finish stuff that I've had sitting around for a very long time. So hopefully I can get to it by the end of December, but I will talk about it early 2021, that's for sure. And that's the same with my next book as well. And that is Wicked as You Wish by Rincha Pecco. This is the same author who wrote the Bone Witch series trilogy, and this one is an urban fantasy, so it's a bit different. It follows Tala and her family and a bunch of other characters. There's also a secret prince, and there are magic users and curses involved and family curses. It's kind of also interwoven with fairy tale lore as well, but with a twist, which is pretty cool. Usually I'm not into fairy tale stuff, so when I read that I'm like, could take it or leave it, but the way that this is going so far, it's interesting enough to continue. At the moment, I think I'm going to give it a 3.5 stars. I am more than halfway through it, so I'm definitely going to finish it, but again, like Modoc, this isn't going to get captured in this wrap up as a full I finished this book kind of review, because obviously I have a few more days left of the year and I haven't read this yet, or finished this yet rather. So wanted to mention it. Probably going to be a 3.5 stars, which is probably the same rating that I'm going to give Modoc. They're not going to be huge ratings, but just enjoyable ones. And then lastly, I have Pink by Lily Wilkinson. This is potentially a coming out story. I know it's a queer YA that is Australian. I've had this on my TBR since I was at uni because it was one of my assigned readings, but the way that my uni course worked, we had like 9 assigned books and we only had to write an essay on 3 of them. So I just didn't pick this one, but I acquired it because it was part of my course list. So it has been sitting around for a very long time. At an event, I got Lily to sign it because she is a wonderful speaker. Lily is a brilliant ambassador for writing, especially for young adult writing and youth in a literary space in Australia, in Melbourne very specifically. And so I wanted to give this a chance and not just get rid of it for that reason, but I don't know if it's going to be up my radar or up my alley still, because I have grown and shifted my reading tastes in the time that I've acquired this. So I'm going to give it a try and hopefully finish it, or start it at least, at the end of this year. That's why I'm including it here, because I don't want to leave it off this list, but at the same time, I don't have high hope that I'm going to finish it by the end of the year. We'll see. Anyway, let me talk now about my reading stats really quickly. This year in 2020, I did set my reading goal to 100 books, but I only read 90, which is still pretty damn good, to be honest. I'm actually quite happy with that number. I'm still like 9 books behind if I want to read 100 books on schedule, and it is only a couple of days until the new year, so I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm happy with that. I read, I think, around 36,000, 37,000 pages in this year. Usually I would read between 44 to 45,000 pages, but again, that's probably because I'm a little bit behind, just because it's been COVID this year. I've also been job hunting. I've been stressed. I managed to find a job, and then I've had my hours change from having more flexibility with filming and editing videos, so I've had to reshuffle a lot of time. So based on all of that and how this year has moved, I'm pretty happy with the fact that I've read 90 books, because that is a lot. I've also not given any books under a 3-star rating, so I just checked my Goodreads and I've given no 1 stars, I've given no 2 stars. Maybe I gave 1 2.5 stars because that was with True Life, but apart from that, nothing. And then the shortest book that I've read this year is The King's Letters by Sebastian de Castell, which is a novella set after The Quartet, which is about the king, who before the series even starts in book 1, he dies. And then the longest book that I read this year was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson, and I'm surprised that it wasn't Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Maybe that's not reflecting properly, but I think Oathbringer was a few pages longer, even though they were both like 1,200, almost 1,300 pages long. So still a pretty good achievement, honestly. But I think that's all I have to say for my end of year wrap up. Thank you so much for watching my channel. Let me know if you got through some books this month, because power to you. It was a really busy month to do so. So again, thank you so much for watching my videos. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.